Hey guys, it's time to make true on a community goal on Twitch where people have pulled together channel points to unlock this community goal. The goal was make a wish list for patch notes. I will explain everything in the video. It's a talking video where we theory craft the changes that we think Warcraft 3 could use. And just to be clear, Blizzard may or may not implement this. I haven't heard from them, but we do have a map making team and we have a let's say a third-party platform via W3 Champions, so this can be independently away from Blizzard implemented by editing the maps that we play on. It is possible. Therefore, this might be very relevant. Are you ready for a shake-up in the meta, some buffs and nerfs, as if we have an actively supported game by the dev? Or will someone come from Blizzard and look at this? Here are my wishes for patch notes. Let me know what you think. Terrible list, great list, agree with what? Some new ideas? Video coming up. Enjoy. Hey guys, we are at a late stage in Warcraft 3's life cycle, but the game is still alive and kicking for a niche club of people. I still love to play it, people still love to watch it, and there's still burgeoning esports going on as well in the West and in Asia. But we haven't heard from Blizzard in a long time from now. I've been thinking about making patch notes for the game as we haven't had any patch in over a year. Some of the game parts may be quite benefiting from a little bit of attention, a patch that can shake up the meta and make some underused things better and make some overused things a little weaker. So I came up with a list of changes that I think may be really nice for Warcraft 3. And on Twitch, users have contributed cute points to unlock the goal of my doing this live on stream. So here we are. We're going to be going through patch notes that I think would be beneficial for the shaking up the meta of Warcraft 3. And you may be wondering, why am I doing it if Blizzard hasn't been heard from for so long? And indeed, I don't have a direct contact with Blizzard right now. I don't know if anyone is working on or is going to be working on Warcraft 3, despite reassurances in some of their recent lawsuit press notices that they are still working on that game as well, on Reforged. So I don't have any assurances there, but my hope is if there is somebody there with a will, with the means, but without the knowledge of what to change, because Warcraft 3 is such a deep and intrinsically complicated game, that they see these notes and that they use it as a strong foundation to make their changes based on, to have another patch coming up. In the event that this doesn't happen because of whatever reason, we have a strong community initiative via W3 Champions, which is where all the, let's say, more avid RTS players are playing, the more skilled players, and basically the backbone of the competitive scene and its practice facilities, essentially. W3 Champions has the ability to make their own patches. We, as a community, have the ability to make our own patches. That's not necessarily going to be easy. There are many different opinions, and every person, no matter how unbiased they think they are, can be biased. Everyone has their main race. I am personally an Orc player. I am more interested in a general versatile display of strengths from different races. I'm more interested in the health of the game than I am in just my race being stronger. But it is still hard not to become biased sometimes, because you see everything through the lens of your own experiences, and that includes being the best at Orc and being worse at other races. This kind of bias is going to affect me and others, so stay critical, but also consider my feedbacks that I'm going to be giving, the patch notes that we're going to be going through in just a second, with the idea that I do have a big vested interest and desire for versatile race representation. I want a healthy game, and I'd rather focus on buffs than nerfs, because I'd rather keep the people that are interested in Warcraft now to have them remain interested, and people that wouldn't like the changes, you know, there's always a chance that someone quits because of it. And there's a lower chance that someone that's inactive now comes back because of nerfs to another faction. More likely they come back because of buffs to their faction. So I want to give something fun to every race, and you'll be seeing that in my notes. So either W3 champions via the maps that we play on ladder or Blizzard can make some changes. And if it is the community, it will have to, of course, be signed off on by most of the major tournament organizations in the world, so that there is a consistent practice environment for pro players, and so that it doesn't confuse the fans and viewers too much. Having said all that, without further ado, let's jump right into it. My Warcraft 3 balance patch. Alright, here we go. So I'm going to be focusing on buffs, as that is more fun and brings more people to play. As we have a niche community, any negative changes have a risk to shrink the community. And there's much less chance for an active player to want to start playing just because some other dominant thing got nerfed. One final note, when I'm done with my patch notes, that is when I am going to be taking Q&A from chat. So while I will be watching this video back and seeing what everyone thought about everything, there's no need to expect an answer from me right now. Q&A will be at the end, and it will be part of the video and part of this live stream. So, buffs to human. And keep in mind that the buffs and nerfs often need to go together. Sometimes it doesn't make sense to cherry pick one of these and say, hey, why are you buffing this, without looking at the nerf that is associated with it. So let's jump into it. Two races have a speed aura. Unholy aura for Undead and endurance aura for Orc. But human can tend to fall off in the late game because they move quite slowly. Giving everyone the same blanket movement speed aura is boring and is a shrinkage of design. I could just give movement speed aura to devotion, but that would be boring. So I want to give something unique to both human and elf that can have them keep up with movement speed in the late game, or indeed at any part in the game. So I thought, what if when brilliance and devotion aura are both combined, they give a movement speed aura to the units inside of it. And that can help them a little bit in the late game against Orc, where they can struggle, against Night Elf, and against Undead, in fact. Because I don't know if it's because the big humans have quit, like Infi and TH. That's why human has less inspiration and less performances. Or if human is indeed having a rougher patch. But this may help them a little bit as well. Brilliance and Devotion combine to become a movement speed aura as well, in addition to their standard benefits. Cannon Tower, the least used tower, can have a little bit faster projectile speed to make them better at their niche, at defending against dryads, perhaps huntresses, and perhaps even doing some bonus damage to heroes. A little bit of a robust backbone in protecting bases. And you can have 5 seconds off from the build time, from 65 to 60. Holy Light is quite a slow cast speed. And what you often find is that Holy Light gets most used in the versus Undead matchup. Human Undead right now is a bit of a problematic matchup. You have human able to fast expand, and Undead has to try and stop it. And if human succeeds very well in the fast expansion, they end up winning the game. But if Undead does too much peasant damage, Undead wins. And there's very little 1 versus 1 base because human simply is not able to play a normal game against Undead 1-on-1 base. So my goal is, and I think this is a difficult to achieve goal, to have human be more able to do a 1 versus 1 base, human versus Undead, which will be more interesting and more fair because it is not completely contingent on whether or not they can get up a fast expansion, which is a very problematic thing to try to balance. Anytime a race can fast expand and must fast expand because the alternative is so unpalatable, they will. And the effectiveness of it and the damage they take during it will be entirely determinant for the results of the game. So if possible, less need and possibility to fast expand for both Night Elf and human. And I'm addressing it in 2 different ways for human and elf. And well, we'll see how that goes. So one of those changes to make one base more effective against Undead without overly much affecting the other matchups, as we can all agree that we don't see a lot of Paladin against Night Elf or against Orc. And we do see some in Human Mirror, but there's never a balance issue in Human Mirror, is there? So Holy Light cast speed increased. He raises his hand, he tries to Holy Light, and someone gets Coil Nova to the next century and die already. Mortar team are another unit that can easily get nuked. Anti-magic shell is very popular against undead in particular, and that makes mortars good against banshees. And anti-magic shell is good against like Holy Light, Clap, Stormbolt, Blizzard, and Griffins. So using mortars to counter banshees is nice. And this little health buff would be most useful in that scenario because undead, more than any other race, can Coil Nova mortars very easily to death. And I don't know if 10 is enough, but I don't want to make them overly imbalanced against Night Elf either, where they can be also very, very useful against Mountain Giants, Archer, Dryad. So just 10 HP extra. Polymorph is one of those very expensive spells that barely ever gets used, minus 20 mana. Defend upgrade is quite important to stop Fiend pressure and to stop Headhunter pressure, but it takes quite long to research. I want to try out minus 10 seconds research time there. Mechanical Critter is one of the rarely ever used things that has no chance of becoming imbalanced because you can just kill it in one shot. And it's up to the skill of the player to find critters and kill them. Some people have made year-long habits of killing all the critters they see, and I guess they will have an advantage. But anyway, giving it some bonus sight range can be useful to allow humans to use this fun scouting tool and get some information. It can never be too reliable of a tool because, you know, dies at once, costs 50 gold, it's quite expensive. So I don't think this is imbalanced. In fact, this may not be enough, but I think it's a nice change. Blacksmith, the minus 10 lumber can have the following advantage. Paladin rifle build, the opener, can become a slightly smoother build order. Slightly better build order. Mostly targeted at that. Blacksmith minus 10 lumber will also have an effect for the human versus orc matchup, where you try to go 3 footies into rifle, Archmage Mountain King. Also not a bad thing for that to be a bit cheaper. Orc versus human is probably slightly orc favored right now. So having 10 lumber extra help there against a race that continually Feral Spirit harasses against peasants will probably be a nice boon to the human to have a bit more of a streamlined economy. And it's not so big of a change that it will imbalance the matchup the other way. And Pala Rifle is also a cool strat to see and to do against undead, and it will give human a second build a little bit more easily that does rely on one basing. Thorzane is the one that made it most work, and he was so close so many times to beat Happy. A player that barely plays Warcraft 3 against one of the best players the game has ever seen, Thorzane against Happy, was continually going down to the wire with 2-3 scores. The fact that no other humans are playing it against Happy or otherwise just shows how much players still have to learn despite everything we have learned. Some people just don't have the micro perhaps, but this little help will make that build a little bit more viable, which means more 1 versus 1 basing, which is easier to balance. Control Magic takes 45 seconds to upgrade for the Spellbreaker. I'm gonna buff that to 30 seconds only, but it will have some nerfs as well. It's all hinged together. Now for Siege Engines right now are a send and forget unit that is designed at just eliminating someone's base. They do have an anti-air attack, Barrage, which does 25 damage per rocket up to 9 rockets. But we barely ever see Siege Engines used in this capacity. And I'd like to see that a little bit more. Not just as a base raider ability, but actually as part of a team fight. For this, I'm making them 10 movement speed faster, which will also allow Siege Engines to outrun other siege weaponry, which all move at 220. Catapult, Glaive Thrower. Mortar is actually faster, I think. But Catapult, Glaive Thrower, and Meat Wagon. So they'll be 10 faster. They will do more damage against air, 27. This will also help human when they are facing a Pandaren Brewmaster and things that are air. So an enemy Panda and air, for example, Panda Destroyers, Panda and I don't know, like fairy dragons, panda and hippo riders, panda and chimera, can all be so good together because panda kind of owns dragon hawks and flying machines with his anti-air. And then it's hard to counter some of the air that the opponent has. Even in Human Mirror, if there's a panda and then they go griffins, it's kind of hard to counter those griffins because you can't really go to flying machines. And maybe Siege Engine will be a nice alternative in that situation, as he's more tanky. And the movement speed will allow them to keep up better in fights. In return, there will be a nerf on them as well in another capacity, but you'll see that in the nerf section. Let's move on. Nerfs to human. Siphon mana cost is right now 10. I want to increase that to 30. Siphon mana gains 15, 30, and 45 mana per second, per level, respectively. So it's 15, 15, 15, 15, and then it's 30, 30, 30, 30, 30, and then it's 45, 45, 45, 45, 45. It's one of the most broken abilities in the game, but because the Blood Mage doesn't do some of the things that the other heroes do, he's still not being picked as much, which is interesting. It's kind of the weirdest ironies of the game for me, that you can have an ability like Siphon, which is just completely broken, but you don't always want to take him. For example, you can't go Blood Mage first oftentimes because he doesn't facilitate the fast expansion as much as Archmage does. And without Brilliance Aura, you cannot really support any hero mana or caster mana strategies. So Storks, Priests and Breakers are off the table if you start with Blood Mage. And you can go Mountain King first, which just offers completely different advantages than Blood Mage first. We do see more Blood Mage second these days. And Siphon is pretty busted. But if we nerf Siphon, something else has to be buffed. And one thing that I didn't list in these changes that I think should also be included, a small cast delay decrease, perhaps, for Flame Strike. And a bit cheaper in mana, from 135 to 125, perhaps. And I want to give one more buff, and it's kind of listed here. I want to increase the cooldown by 2 seconds when used on enemies, so that interrupting it is more rewarded. Right now, if you interrupt it, they spend 10 mana to gain 15. Even if you interrupt it very fast, they spend 10 to gain 15, so they gain 5. And because the cooldown is so short, they do it again in a few seconds. And that's really frustrating and to be honest, quite overpowered to go up against when you're an Undead with DK Lich, or when you're an Orc with Farseer, Tavern Chieftain. It makes it more worth it to interrupt it, which rewards skill and has an interactive gameplay component. But when you use it on allies, it should be a little bit more forgiving, so that you can do more mix and matching when you use Blood Mage to give some mana to the Mountain King, some to the Paladin, some to a Sorceress, some to a Priest. So -2 as the baseline is right now when used on allies. So you can take mana from an opponent, and then you can give mana to yourself in the same fight still, give mana to Mountain King to do more thunderclaps, and then very quickly you can take mana again. So it kind of shakes out to be roughly the same in a fight, except there's more reward for an opponent to interrupt it, both because of the initial cost and the cooldown. I think it's a good idea. Control Magic range right now is 700, which is more than hero auto attack distance. And this means that pretty much once they get Control Magic, it's a shutdown on everything that's a Witch Doctor or a summon. Some summons are so tanky that the Breaker doesn't have enough mana to take them immediately. But for example, Pharaoh Spirit level 3 needs to be hit once, and then they can be taken. And Water Elemental level 3 needs to be dispelled maybe twice before it can be taken. But the range makes it a non-issue. Wherever it is, it's gonna take it, you know? And I've tried Witch Doctor tactics against human, where I have a heal ward and I put it way at the back, way behind my hero. And I have a front line against the Breakers, and then there's a Headhunter line, and then there's the hero line, and then there's the heal ward all the way back, and the Breaker takes one step forward and takes it anyway. And because heal ward has 5 mana, it costs him nothing. And so there isn't any counterplay to Control Magic. It's not interesting. This unit was designed when TFT came out because Magic reigned supreme in Reign of Chaos, Mass Caster builds. There were so many different things to address Mass Caster: lumber increase, damage reduction, damage type change, that casters are not dominant anymore in TFT. They have never been dominant. In fact, we live in a ranged attacker domination era. And so some of these designs, like Destroyer and Breaker, they have become so quintessentially strong and powerful that it just shuts down Bloodlust completely. It just shuts down Witch Doctor Healing Ward completely, Stasis Ward, complete shutdown. And decreasing the range allows a bit of counterplay. If I put it backwards, you need to step up a bit more in order to steal it. That allows me a few more free hits, maybe a Kodo Devour, maybe an Ensnare, maybe I can do a body block. But with 700, there's no counterplay. So I think that's a good change. Control Magic can also be moved to tier 3 instead of tier 2, and that's why the duration of research is shorter. The reason is two things. Again, allows maybe for stasis wordplay, and also for the human mirror matchup, there's a lot of stealing of each other's summons. And this actually allows breakers to have an edge against someone that wants to tech to tier 3. Now, human mirror has seen several different metas over the course of the lifespan of Warcraft. And in Reign of Chaos, it was mostly Knight Mortar with tier 3, triple hero, which is incredibly fun to watch, to play. It's skillful, it has a nice cadence, pacing. There's 3 heroes, there's Knights, there's Mortars, then there's an incentive for someone to go Griffins, and then there's an incentive to switch into Flying Machines against the Griffins, or maybe the new Siege engines. It's really fun. What's not fun is both have 20 breakers, 4 priests, and Stormbolt click each other's hero as they cycle breakers back and forth and try to keep them alive and stuff. The weaker you make breakers, the more humans in mirror will be allowed to go tier 3, and that will be more fun. And for the rest, Control Magic doesn't get used a lot against Undead or Night Elf. We don't see a lot of breakers there anymore, so it doesn't really affect matchups other than Orc and Human. So right now, when we evaluate humans so far with the changes that I've listed, it's mostly buffs, and there's very few meta nerfs, and that also kind of reflects that I think human could use a little bit of love in the current matchups, including against Orc. But the Control Magic is a nerf against Orc, but you also see some nerfs on Orc meta that will help balance that out a bit. Gotta see the whole thing as a whole. Defend mode. Make footies 10% faster during defend mode and 5% damage reduction less. So they will absorb a little bit less piercing damage, which will make them easier to take down, but they move quite a bit faster. They can have a bit more gap closing on fiends and headhunters, where they will be used the most, or against archers. All right, let's go to the next page. This is part of hope with the buffs that we've seen so far on human, to make them slightly more one-base sufficient, some of the things that were buffs. This is to make expansion slightly disincentivized. I know it's not a big change, but I really don't dare to make too big of changes, as overall the game is in quite a good state. But that lumber that we gained on the blacksmith, minus 10 lumber, we added here to the town hall, plus 10. And it will make expanding just slightly less attractive by comparison, and maybe we'll make a change. Masonry level 3 is something we rarely ever see in one-on-one. In fact, we rarely ever see level 1 anymore. It used to be very meta for human to get all 3 levels. They were then nerfed in cost about 3 years ago. And that actually probably was one of the biggest reasons why human isn't dominant anymore. I think for most of Warcraft, human was very, very strong with imbued Masonry level 3. You would see mass towers, 2 base mass tower, 3 base mass tower against Undead, against Elf, against Orc, and then mass air or mass siege engines. And, you know, this is the style we know from Infi and many other humans. And it made them strong, but it's also boring from both sides. And Masonry level 3 barely gets used, so first of all, this is an unimpactful nerf. But secondly, it is a removal of frustration in FFA, in team play, and in the most lame versions of play. It's also consistent with spikes from Orc, which has 2 levels of upgrades. I really don't think we should have buildings being upgraded that many times to make them so hard to kill, with 8 fortified armor and quintillion HP. Siege engines got buffed in movement speed and anti-air damage. -1 armor makes them slightly less good at the base race Pepega push type of build. And the cost up by 5 lumber and 5 gold to reflect their better status as an anti-air unit. While still, this is affordable for a 2-base player who's spamming siege engines to raise the opponent's base to the ground. But this makes it, this makes it more of a higher investment cost and more useful for a big battle in a 1-base human. The 1 armor will have a very little effect in standard battles because almost never will someone focus siege engine with fortified armor over literally anything else when it's a 1 versus 1 base fight. Like if I bring 2 support siege engines, you're not going to focus them. So that armor really doesn't affect their team fighting capabilities at all. If you ever take down siege engines, it's when they're isolated and Pepega pushing. And yeah, so I think that's pretty good changes together. Now, Night Elf. Thorns. Give it movement speed aura as well. Now all 4 races have a movement speed aura. They will all work the same in terms of what they give. But for human you needed 2 auras combined. And Night Elf, it will only work for ground. For Thorns, it will only work for ground. So that Hippo Riders or Hippogriffs or Fairy Dragon, some of those units, don't become too fast and too OP against Undead. So for Night Elf against Undead, one of the metas has been Keeper Fast Expand into Fairy Dragons and Hippo Riders. Kind of a weird build. And they go Entangle and they go Thorns. But at some point, Undead gets a bunch of Destroyers and it becomes a micro battle. Night Elf has the numbers, Undead has the micro. And I fear if you give Thorns movement speed for air, it's going to make Hippos a bit too good into Undead. Hippos and Fairies. So have it only work for ground. This makes Keeper a valid choice with Thorns or even to rescale. To not use both of his mana abilities, but to use Thorns to, for example, have his bears go faster than the opponent's bears who's playing Demon Naga. Demon Naga being more popular and probably better now than Demon Keeper. Demon Keeper used to be nice in Night Elf Mirror, but he kind of gets overshadowed by either Tinker against Tier 1 Night Elf or by Naga because she comes out faster and does more damage. So maybe Thorns can be good like that. And Thorns, we can all agree, is one of the worst abilities in the game. Together with Scourge, Bone Chimes, Vampiric Aura. So I want to have a buff for both of those. Then, Druid of the Talon, Mark of the Talon. Right now it costs 25,100. I want to make it cost 50-50. That makes it a bit more affordable. And it should also be researchable at Adept. So Adept Talents, which is the first upgrade, not the Master Training. The reason this is good is because it is consistent with when they're allowed to fly. Talents can fly with the first upgrade. Why should the Flying Fairy Fire be only researchable after Master Training, when they get Cyclone? This kind of design and spell order and upgrade order leads to you either never making talents or going mass Cyclone talents against Orc. And there's no middle way. We never see talents like 1 support talent, 2 support talents, 1 talent in the air with Fairy Fire just to get some scouting. And that does seem really fun. So if you make 1 talent and you get Adept Training and Mark, which is still a fairly big investment, you can keep doing Flying Fairy Fire on an opponent. Will we see it with just these changes? I don't know, but it's more likely to happen. All right, Warden, +1 agility. I have some nerfs to Elf. It also should have some buffs. Elf did win the last few big tourneys, but we have a relatively small pro player base, so it is too difficult to judge that this is because of Elf or anything like that. And Warden does get used a little bit less. She does get used. You can't buff her intelligence because she's a very good spellcaster. Giving her more agility helps her a little bit in the early game, where she tends to lose out. And in the late game, she's mostly about mana, not agility. So I don't think this will like break her in any way, but it makes her able to survive early human pushes that come with like Rifle, Blood Mage. Very hard to stop for Night Elf, like a big Blood Mage push. So, yep, buff. Immolation, one of the worst consuming mana abilities in the game because it scales at 10, 15, 20 and costs 7 mana per second. I'm going to make that 6 mana with a damage of 10, 17 and a half, 25 per second. This should make Immolation a more attractive alternative, either for reskill or as a scaling ability that you pick from early and keep upgrading, over mana burn or evasion. I still don't think we'll see it much. Mana burn, evasion more. But it is right to upgrade it so that it becomes a competitive choice. Marksmanship. Make it cheaper by 25 lumber. But it's going to do 1 damage less. Right now it adds 4 damage to archers. It'll add 3. Starfall. Minus 50 mana. Minus 20 seconds cooldown. Starfall has all the channeling heroic abilities, ultimates that get used in battle only, are weak. Stampede, Tornado, Volcano, Earthquake, Starfall, they're all weak because they're interruptible. Starfall lasts 45 seconds and thus stars on everything in vision for 50 damage a pop. Potentially, its ceiling of impact is very high, but because it's interruptible, it's weak. So the best way to buff it is to be allowed to cast it more often at a lower penalty of mana. Orc of Venom does 9 damage per second from Venom, while adding 5 baseline. The total damage it does, I'm not 100% sure, it's like 70. That's a lot. And it also scales with other orbs of Venom. So if you have 3 heroes, then you will do 27 DPS poison when you hit a target. 15 baseline, and then 27 DPS. Orb of Venom. Orb of Coil, you call it. It's too much. It's the reason why we see triple Orb of Venom spamming all the time, but we never see triple Orb of anything else spamming. It is insane damage, and together with Marksmanship, it makes Night Elf just have insane damage on peeps. Entangle with Keeper is a very restrictive playstyle for the other races. Human can say, well, my footies and rifles will all just die. The best I can do is kill them myself as you entangle them. Orc will say, well, my grunts is not allowed to be anywhere on the map. You can fast expand, because if I bring out any grunt at any second that is wrong time, it will get entangled and killed. And headhunters, don't even get me started. They are not allowed to be on the map until I have purge. For undead, they have to skeleton DK creep. They have to do everything in the first 6 minutes of the game with only DK and skeletons. An acolyte and then a lich. They can use ghouls only when they have confirmed information that the keeper is somewhere else on the map. When they see him somewhere and he doesn't have staff, they're allowed to creep 1 or 2 camps with ghouls. But the moment you meet the keeper with your units, you're gonna lose unit after unit after unit. The duration of Entangle is 9, 18 and 30 seconds. I'd like to see it 8, 15 and 25. Besides doing less damage, it will also mean that there are fewer auto attacks on that unit. 1 auto attack less, 3 auto attacks less, and 5 auto attacks less. This is most impactful for the level 1 ability, minus 1 second. It may just make a Headhunter and a Grunt survive. Ancient of War creeping actually has a number of advantages. Mostly, there is no poison going to anywhere on Night Elf. This has a map balancing issue. Whenever maps get made and a map maker thinks poison creeps are a good addition, they will affect races very asymmetrically. Human gets completely messed up with footies. Poison on everything, militia, footies, all hurt. But Night Elf can have Huntresses and Archers be completely unpoisoned. Because here's how poison works. A poison creep will attack every unpoisoned unit. When a unit is poisoned, he will stop attacking it. He will then switch to the next until everyone is poisoned. And if then someone is unpoisoned again, he will start from the start. That's how the AI works. And every race has to deal with this, except Night Elf when you have an Ancient of War there. Because Ancient of War doesn't get poisoned, poison creeps will immediately attack the Ancient of War and never swap out. I think Night Elf can get poisoned too. But there is an issue where Dryad poison, Wyvern poison, and Murloc poison, and Gnoll Poacher poison can do too much damage on Ancient of War. Because poison is spell damage, Ancient of War has fortified armor, and there's no interaction between that. Half damage on Ancient of War. So it's not about the damage the Ancient of War takes, but it's about the fact that other Night Elf units will get poisoned a little bit as well. That's why I'm doing this. It could even be quarter damage, or half. But there should be some swap out. This will force Night Elf to micro their units that they don't want to get poisoned away from any creeping. And I think that will be a good gameplay change. Druid of the Claw, they got their mana buff recently. They got their damage nerf reversals, so damage buffs essentially. The mana has been huge. Bears are better than before against Orc and against Human. And well, against Undead, I think Bears... I don't think they're broken there. They get pretty much owned by spells and Destroyer, but -1 damage. Tranquility. Tranquility is the only channeling ability, together with Mass Teleportation, that has out of battle purposes. Everything else has to be used on buildings from the opponent or on units. And Tranquility and Mass Teleport are allowed to be used out of battle effectively. Because of this, it is very strange that both Tranquility and Mass Teleport have the shortest channel heroic cooldowns and mana cost in the game. You would think that something that is so versatile in combat and out of combat should have the longest cooldown to make a gameplay decision when you want to use it. Do you want to use it out of combat to heal or in combat to heal? Do you want to teleport out of a fight or do you want to teleport for macro? They should have a longer cooldown. Stampede, Starfall can be shorter. It's like, oh, even if I can Stampede all the time, it's -150 mana and you interrupt it. I do it again, -150 mana and you interrupt it. But Tranquility is so short in cooldown. It's like 45 seconds and it costs like 125 mana, which is insane. Well, Ancient of War and Ancient of Lore should be poisoned, but mostly Ancient of War I think is the main issue. So I think Tranquility can be nerfed a bit like this. Okay, next. Orc. Witch Doctor Healing Ward, one of the lowest used master training abilities in the game, together with Polymorph and Cripple. The Healing Ward has 5 health, which means even a peon can kill it in one shot. Make it 20 health. It will cost a little bit more mana for the Breaker to steal it. Not a lot, but just a bit more. And it means workers and the lowest upgraded ranged units can no longer one-shot it. A ghoul, a footman will need 2 shots. A hero will still one-shot it, so it's not a big difference, and that's why I feel comfortable with this buff, as healing wards pretty much, they don't really get used at the moment. At least in one-on-one. And this balancing is about one-on-one. Master training, research time right now is 75 seconds. I want to upgrade it to 60. Healing ward, mana cost is 200. I would like to downgrade it to 175. But any 2 of these 3 changes can be used. It doesn't have to be all 3 of them. The Witch Doctor stasis arming time from 9 to 8 seconds. It previously was 10 and Blizzard buffed it to 9. It's still completely unimpactful. Mainly because Breakers steal it, Wisp or Dryad dispel it, Destroyers dispel it, and because you got 8 seconds to do so, or you can walk away or kill it. And so 8 seconds. I see Ixot is asking about it wouldn't affect anything, the Ancient of War poison change. I'm not just making this change for current maps. You have to think a bit beyond that. You can always balance the game with current maps and making new maps. And new maps. That will balance the game and the matchups and the races. We can always do that in the future. This is a global change that will help maps be more flexible in order to affect races in the same way when there's poison, when there's dispel, and so on and so forth. So, stasis ward, 8 seconds. Don't want to overdo it. Let's try it out. Next page. Wind Riders right now are one of the weakest units in the game. They have a very Fire Lord-like quality in that they can sometimes do something for a short period of time, and after that they will be the reason you lose the game. Because they give 85 XP, they're one of the squishiest units in the game, and they cost 4 food and 265 gold. They have 500 plus life, 575 for 4 food and 265 gold, 85 XP. By comparison, most units have double or triple the survivability for that price. And all they get from it is they can move in the air quite fast and they have good damage, but it's not really better than Headhunter for cast. And that makes them about as useless as a Hippogriff Rider, which, granted, I don't have an idea for yet. I wanted to buff Hippo Rider so they can be used in 3 more matchups, but that might make them too strong against Undead, so I don't feel comfortable buffing Hippo Rider yet. But if Knight of Undead goes in the favor of Undead with this patch, then maybe Hippo Rider can receive a buff across the board. I don't know what yet. So, Brute Strength, the Grunt upgrade, could also be applied to Wind Rider, giving them 50 bonus health and 2 bonus auto attack damage. Perhaps it would become necessary to nerf Envenomed Spears a bit, less poison. That upgrade is pretty crazy, but you can't really make use of it because Wyverns are so weak for so long in the game and they are so squishy. Maybe this will help. Burning Oil right now does 6633 damage over half second marks, I believe. It's either half second or full second marks for a total of 18. And it should maybe do 7, 7, 5, 5, 24. Almost all the siege weaponry in this game is weak. Meatwagon, Glaive Thrower and Demolisher are virtually useless in one-on-one, either for their intended purpose of sieging buildings or their intended purpose of being a long-range artillery mangonel type of weapon in battles. Only mortar teams have been viable for the longest time ever, and that's because they can get healing from priests and they're a bit faster than all the others. The unique niche for Glaive Thrower is tier 1. The unique niche for Meatwagon is spreading Disease Cloud and carrying corpses. For Disease Cloud, we do see them being used. Late game Undead versus Elf, couple of Meatwagons spread disease on all the Dryads. But Burning Oil catapults are pretty much never used. We've seen it a bit from Kiwikaki, and I've tried it a bit, and I've managed to get a win here or there, but there's never really been important tournament games in the last 15 years or so that use catapults. And maybe this will help make them a little bit more effective against, for instance, archers or enemy siege weaponry. Then, Pulverize upgrade. Tavern now has a one-third Pulverize embedded in the baseline of itself. Pulverize does 60 damage when upgraded, true damage to everything around the Tauren. And the baseline mini Pulverize is 20 damage. This was an excellent change by Blizzard a couple of years ago that I would like to expand a bit further on and close the gap between the uselessness of the Tauren and the usefulness of the Knight. The Knight has become an essential unit against Undead. If a human can get fast expansion, they race to tier 3. They get Knights that now have a baseline Sundering Blades, which is not just a new upgrade, but it has been an embedded upgrade. They now always do bonus damage to medium, whereas Pulverize still has a very ponderous, costly upgrade, 100/225. You could embed Pulverize, but I think it will be too strong. Many orcs have access to a Tauren Totem because they are going for Spirit Walkers, and adding one Tauren without any need to upgrade them further and having a damage of 60 immediately is probably too crazy. Any orc would get a single Tauren in most scenarios. So I think there should still be an upgrade, not an embed. But make it cheaper, 75/150. Mirror Image has been buffed many times in mana cost, from 125 to 110, 100, now it's like 80 or 75, but we still don't see it. You can tank a bit with it, you can confuse a bit with it, but Mirror Image has a number of drawbacks. When you cast Mirror Image, because both have to be a pure new iteration of the blade's current health and status, it's a cleanse effect. And this is kind of cool. You cleanse Acid Bomb, you cleanse Entangle, but it also cleanses buffs. And it has to. There's no change possible to it that wouldn't create other issues. So you remove Healing Salve, Spirit Link. So many times you want a Mirror Image, but you lose your survivability, Heal Salve, Spirit Link. And that kind of sucks. There's a second issue where Mirror Images steal Healing Wave. If Mirror Image happens to be the lowest, or any illusion for that matter, Heal Wave will just bump and bounce towards it, and that's a bit of an issue. Give it a bit of extra advantage. Give it 10% damage. The images will help a bit with creeping, allowing to open up opportunities for Blade to do mirror image creeping a little bit faster, bringing Blade back a bit, besides just Farseer spam, and giving a little bit more mid-combat utility. Then, Farsight. It no longer costs mana since a few years ago, and you can reveal an area on the map based on a pure cooldown. An increasingly bigger area for an increasingly short cooldown, I think. Oh no, maybe the cooldown is consistent, 30 seconds. But how about giving a baseline bonus passive vision as well of 100, 200 and 300. Right now, hero vision in daytime is 1800 and nighttime 800. And Night Elf Ultra Vision allows them to keep 1800. So they outvision you by 1000 during the night. Very easy for Night Elf to use that for creep check arenas. Maybe this isn't enough. Maybe Farsight should give bonus passive vision 200, 400, 600. You'll still need to be taking it over Chain Lightning or Feral Spirit. So I don't think it's going to imbalance it. But it would create a powerful alternative choice for Orc to use Farsight when they happen to pick Farseer against Demon Hunter. When you go with Farseer against Demon Hunter, usually you're kind of messed up, because you have 2 mana spells and you're pretty much useless besides that. And this will help. If you go Farsight, you can switch to a lane play style that you go with Farsight and the wolves that you started with, and you can try to evade Night Elf a little bit more. That would mean a Farseer, let's say it's 200, 400, 600. That means Farseer would have 2000 vision to another race's 1800 vision in the day. And they would have 1000 vision in the night, the Farseer, against 1800 Ultra Vision Night Elf. It helps a bit. I don't think it will be too powerful, and you keep the baseline spell cast as well. Next, nerfs to Orc. Headhunter, -1 damage, and I also meant to say plus 5 gold. From 145 to 150 gold, and -1 damage. That will make them a little bit, well, it's just small nerfs that makes them a bit more costly for what they do, a little bit less damage. They still take a lot of damage bonus later from Endurance Aura and Kodo. That means that this will also be a strong nerf, because all those amplifications work on the baseline, and it will have a lower baseline. Hex is a very powerful spell that has a lot of unintended bugs. For example, Hex shuts down mana regeneration for a target. It shuts down experience acquisition for the target. And I think it shuts down purchasing capabilities from a shop. I'm not 100% sure about that. Those are hard to fix. They're bug fixes that we would definitely need Blizzard for. And I'm still keeping in mind, perhaps, that that we're going to self-fix this as a community, not by Blizzard. So, plus 5 mana. Serpent Ward, -1 damage at level 2, -2 damage at level 3. And Endurance Aura, lowering the movement speed bonus that it gets to match it to Unholy Aura, which is 10, 20 to 30, to 10, 17.5, 25 movement speed percentage increase. And that will also be the same that the human and elf auras will have. Then, let's go to Undead. Undead has a lot of junk, a lot of useless stuff. In the current meta, Undead is pretty much required to fast tech for Dispel against Keeper, to fast tech for triple hero in pretty much every matchup, and to have a strong body of ranged units which synergize the best with Orb of Corruption. They need Orb of Corruption, besides the period of time where they could play Cryptlord Fast Expand, which I guess they can still do, but it's not as good, which is probably a good thing, since expansions have problematic balance. So let's buff some underused things. Skeleton Longevity costs 25.75 and upgrades in like 10 or 20 seconds. Just auto upgrade it. Just make skeletons last longer. Why is that a good thing? The more you embed upgrades, the more valid it is to get one of something. StarCraft has done this. in that siege tanks now no longer need siege upgrade. StarCraft 2 has done this. And knights have gotten this, Sundering Blades embed. And it's nice to be able to make one Tauren, even though I argued against it for Tauren because I think it's too powerful. It's nice to have one knight and one necromancer and not need to immediately get that racial upgrade. Right now we do get grunts sometimes without getting brute strength. 1 grunt, 2 grunt, and then transition. And that's a good thing. I think we should stay away from where units are only good when they have their racial upgrade. That when you get the unit, you must also get the racial upgrade for it. And there's one thing I forgot, if I can just backtrack for a second. I would like to buff mounted giants before hardened skin and resistant skin. Make them more valid at tier 2. I don't know how. Kind of didn't write it down. But mountain giants should be buffed at tier 2. No one ever gets mountain giants at tier 2. No one ever wants to. It's never good. But they're way too good at tier 3 with resistant and hardened skin in terms of survivability. So the easiest thing to say, buff their strength at tier 2. Nerf their eventual total strength at tier 3 with the upgrades. And then have those upgrades be a bit cheaper. Now you have a decision. Do I want tier 2 mountain giants or do I want tier 3 mountain giants? Both a valid play. Here's what I get when I do this. Here's what I get when I do that. Gameplay decision. But right now it's binary. Either you don't get mountain giants at all, or you get them with the tier 3 upgrades. Both of them, period. And it would be nice to not have that decision. Yeah, maybe they can have a mini hardened skin at tier 2. I think that's it actually, probably. Like right now, hardened skin at tier 3 is minus 12 damage from all sources of physical. So give them two hardened skin at tier 2, and then have it be a total of 10 at tier 3. So they have 2 baseline and a plus 8 from the upgrade for a total of 10. And then have it be like 50 lumber cheaper. And then you still have a very strong mountain giant that's a little weaker at tier 3, but it's more playable at tier 2 against footies, grunts, headhunters, what have you. Great idea. Let's add it. Then, Undead. Skeletal longevity embedded. Make 1 necro for Death Pact, Dark Ritual, and Scouting. Lovely. Ghoul Frenzy. Ghouls are never used against Orc except when they lose all their fiends and then they do a ghoul timing attack on the Orcish expansion who is playing Headhunters and Raiders. They switch the ghouls, they get Frenzy, it's like a surprise attack, and they will die fast, but they're turning your Headhunters into skeletons, and then they have a fight and they try to win like that. And it's cool. Happy has done this, some others have done this, and it is a valid play. But almost never can you go for main strat ghouls against Orc. Let's say almost never, or never. Ghouls against Elf, you'll make them until about 28 food in the current 1-on-1 pro meta. 28-30 food of ghouls, then you switch to fiends. You'll use the 8 ghouls you have or so with Frenzy in a singular fight, and when they die you never replace them. In Undead Mirror, you would only have ghouls for a while, same roughly as against Night Elf. No more than 30 food in ghouls, and then you switch out of them, you go to fiends. Because they don't scale well into hero abilities and spells. Ghoul Frenzy adds attack speed at tier 3, and this does get used. Have it add some health as well, or if that's too strong, separate upgrade for health. Some way to allow ghouls to be part of some playstyle in the late game. And then Ghoul Cannibalize. Add 1 damage. Almost no one gets Cannibalize. It's a 75 gold upgrade that upgrades in like 20 seconds. It's available at tier 1. Have it add, oh it's 30 seconds. Have it be 20 seconds and add a damage. Now if you want to play ghouls at tier 1 for a while, they're a little bit more effective at killing footies or water elementals, skeletons, killing headhunters, rushing a burrow. Some kind of cool, fun, high-octane playstyle being enabled by it. For example, DK Ghoul Creeping, which we see very rarely from Happy on Turtle Rock, or we see it from Insuperable, DK3 Rush, or TGW, or what was the guy's name? There was some other undead from Eastern Europe. But have some kind of DK2, DK3 Ghoul Rush possible on burrows, get cannibalized, +1 damage. I think it can be nice. Vampiric Aura. 5% extra lifesteal per level. It barely gets used. Dreadlord is the weakest undead hero. It's one of the weakest auras. It doesn't synergize with their best units, Statue, Destroyer, Fiend, Frostworm. It only synergizes with ghouls, which are practically useless, abominations, which only get made for tanking, and disease cloud, not for their attack damage, and skeletons, which can get dispelled. And if you upgrade them all the way, one of them becomes a skeletal mage, ergo ranged. And then it's good for DK, Dreadlord, and Cryptlord. But DK almost never auto attacks because he has to be afraid. Cryptlord and Dreadlord, yeah, they can do some vampiric, and it's very good for Infernal. But I don't think 5% extra per level is going to break it. It may just make it. Abomination, +1 attack damage. Obsidian Statue, +50 health. It was removed before. They are vulnerable and fragile. Have to be a bit more survivable, but there's a big but coming in the nerfs. First Graveyard Corpse comes in 15 seconds after it finishes. Have it come in 5 seconds later. It's a buff, but it's also a quality of life improvement. What this means for a graveyard that is already finished is nothing if you've had it for a while. Any build order involving an early graveyard doesn't care about this. But it does help to delay your graveyard. Therefore, this allows more ghoul play. More ghouls play and less fiend necessity. Knowing that even if your graveyard is late, you can still use it early for skeletons. It's a nice little buff. That's so niche, you can't really imagine how it's going to change things, but it may. Frostworm Freezing Breath right now costs 150, 275. I think it could cost 100/200. Or 150/200. And I don't think that would make it OP. It's kind of fun, making one worm and going to shut down a Tree of Life or an Ancient of Lore or a Chimera Rooster or a Bestiary and having that be a win condition. But nobody ever does that. In one-on-one, people don't get this upgrade at all. In fact, people don't even really get Frostworms. So I think this is conservative, but I think it's a step in the right direction for removing some of those high racial unit upgrade costs and limitations. Unholy Strength and Armor. The melee and armor upgrades for Undead are rare. It's very rare to upgrade ghouls and abominations. So let's make them 25 gold cheaper per level. Animate Dead, the heroic ability for Death Knight. It doesn't last very long. It's not a good ult. Death Knights never really take it, even when they get level 6 or 7 or 8. So let's give it 10-second extra duration and allow it to be a bit better. It will not remotely put it on par with some of the other ultimate abilities in the game, but then Death Knight is a very core and good hero, and core good heroes don't need heroics that are as strong as some other heroes. Like Dark Ranger is not as good, but she has a strong heroic, and maybe that's fine. But I think you can safely do this. Next page. Curse duration is currently 2 minutes on units and 60 seconds on a hero. Nerf it to 60/45. This treatment has already been given to Fairy Fire years ago, when Druids of the Talon, like 3-4 years ago, was still the meta, and Talon's Fairy Fire got nerfed, and their cost got nerfed as well for the Talons. And this was this was just part of an era where things lasted forever. In fact, Witch Doctor's Sentry Ward still lasts 10 minutes, which is actually insane. Maybe that should be nerfed, especially if the other changes to Witch Doctor make it valid, the Witch Doctor. 10 minutes is insane for Vision. Insane, 10 minutes, that's like half the game. Maybe it could be 8 minutes. But Curse, I think 2 minutes on a unit is insane. Like, just recast it if you want it that bad. So, yeah, I think that's a good nerf. Frost Armor gives a move speed debuff of 50%. I think it should be 40. Just like slow, a little bit reduced. It basically makes Blade Master almost unplayable, and Grunts in particular, and Torrents, like anything melee. Fiend, -1 damage. And Obsidian Statue gives 3 mana per tick right now, which makes it a lot better than Brilliance. and it's going to give 2 mana. That's a big nerf. But the statues are more survivable. And I'm not sure about this. Maybe it should be 2.5 mana. But I do think they get too much. And some of the goal with the other changes, in particular this, makes Undead have a less hard of a time to stop the elf expansion and their follow-up damage as well. So hopefully it will balance each other out. And then Disease Cloud, 75 seconds duration instead of 90. And Nerubian, slow 4 seconds instead of 5. Now Nerubian, when you stay inside of it, there's no change. You get continually slowed. But when you walk outside of it, you're still slowed for so long that this is the best tower in the game by a long shot. I think 4 seconds slow will still be very strong. Yeah, maybe for the statue, 2.5 seconds is good. Then, neutrals. Naga, Sea Witch, Mana Shield activation. Right now it costs 25 mana to turn it on. And then it consumes mana for damage taken. And maybe the Fiend minus damage is not necessary. Just leave it. It was my goal to make the best range unit, which are Headhunter, Archer, and Fiend, a little bit less good. Because we have the piercing meta. So I wanted to make all of them a bit less good. -1 damage to Fiend, Headhunter, and Archer via marksmanship. Naga Sea Witch, just make it cost 10 mana. Firelord, Soulburn. Soulburn right now does 80 damage over a 16-second duration. Make it do 15 seconds, 90 damage. Firelord is not very good, and his most important ability is Lava Spawn. His second ability choice is usually either Incinerate or Soulburn. It's pretty 50-50. It's going to make him do a little bit more damage and make Soulburn feel a little bit more impactful. And it has a pretty long casting time, can make that shorter as well. Volcano. Volcano mana cost reduction from 200 to 175 or even 150. If you make it to level 6 with Firelord, you're very lucky. And if you do get there, you're probably not sure what you should take because everything sucks. Volcano, Lava Spawn level 3, Soulburn level 3, and Incinerate level 3. With Incinerate probably being the best level 3 upgrade. If you get there, let's get some Volcano action. Let's get it to a situation where everyone is complaining about how strong Volcano is because it costs only 150 mana. Let's have that be the biggest balancing issue we have. Give him his time to shine. Pandaren triplets, Storm, Earth, and Fire. -10% auto attack damage on all of them. Each one of those little guys does like 65 damage per hit. For a total of like 200 DPS, not counting Immolation, or the fact that they have Taunt, Magic Immunity, Windwalk, Dispel, and Cyclone. This is an insane heroic ability for a hero that is already quintessential to the AoE problematic situation for many races. So like here you have the Panda, that's a good level 1 rush hero for an expansion. He's a good level 3 mid-game hero, and he's insane at level 5. And his 6 is immediate game over, game winning. So I think this is not big enough of a nerf, but I want to take baby steps and not break anything too badly, so -10% auto attack damage. Alchemist baseline auto attack removal against air. This is actually maybe one of the most important changes, especially when it comes to Night Elf against Orc. Night Elf against Orc right now, its keeper controls the map, keeps Orc in base. It's quite favored for Elf right now. Night Elf gets free expansion because they keep the Orc in base with Ultra Vision and Entangle. Then they grab Alchemist, which amplifies the damage of Hunters and Archers. And then Healing Spray for all the tier 1, which Orc needs to try and get a counter expansion and do a like quick push, but they'll always be against 2 bases. And the one thing that they can barely not do at all is to see 10 Hunters and counter it with Wyverns, because both Keeper and the Alchemist are attacking air. It's always already a very quick transition for Night Elf to switch out of Huntresses into Archers. Wind Riders get countered very quickly by Elf, even without having access to Alchemist baseline auto attack. The one gap where Orc can try to hit a timing attack to punish Night Elven greed of an early expo with Huntresses, while also creeping, harassing, teching to tier 3, is while there's Huntresses, Orc tries to get one Wyvern. That's what they try to do right now on a map like Concealed Hill. That one Wyvern is supposed to do some damage to Huntresses, but it gets attacked very quickly by Keeper and Alchemist, and then it cannot be used as much as to wait for healing. And if you remove the Alchemist baseline anti-air, you can still get it back with Orb of Venom, but there will be a price to pay. You don't get it for free anymore, and it allows some Wyvern play into Night Elf. Reduce Pitlord cleave damage. Right now it does true damage, true physical damage, which is called enhanced physical. It ignores armor. 40%, 65, 90%. Pitlord is one of the most broken heroes in the game, actually. Cleave radius is huge. To give you an idea, if a Pitlord hits a town hall, he also kills the peasants behind it. If you hit a Spellbreaker, you also kill the Archmage with it. It's a lot of damage. The initial Pitlord auto attack on the main target doesn't ignore armor, but the splash does. So you could be hitting a 0 armor peasant, do 50 damage, and then you'll do 90%, 45, to everything behind it, including on a siege engine that has 8 fortified armor. So you do 45 damage on a 8 fortified armor siege engine. The armor calculation is on the first unit hit, so if you hit a low armor unit, you do full damage to heroes and siege engines and knights with inner fire and devotion. So it's there's no armor calculation at all, says Ixod. Wow. So it's pretty insane. This was buffed. To me, kind of hard to understand why. By Blizzard a couple of years ago, they thought Pitlord is like useless hero. And he's been quite good since. The fun fact is, we don't see Pitlord being used as much as you would think. As you should think, with how strong this is. But I think that's only because there's other good heroes too. Cleave is still broken. So, a little bit less, 10% less per level. Then, Tavern revives have a way of making a hero kill feel cheapened and less important. You kill a hero and it gets immediately rebought over and over sometimes. All the resources go to it. A small cost increase is what I propose. 5%. That would make a level 1 gold cost of revive cost 360 instead of 340. At level 3 it'd be 535 instead of 510. At level 5, 715 instead of 680. And at level 10, this. Right now there are situations where you always revive instead of altar retrain. And this will make it a little bit more of a gameplay decision rather than a no-brainer. Now let's go to items. Circlet is the best permanent 2-drop in the game. It's better than claws, gloves and ring. Gloves being by far the weakest, circlet by far the best, followed by claws, and then ring is the third best or the second worst. Half circlet have 3 versions. Circlet of strength, circlet of agility and circlet of intelligence. 2-1-1, 1-2-1 and 1-1-2 in stats. And you can also buy those 3 variations from the shop. This will make it a fun choice who to put the circlet on based on the stat that it is. So, 3 circlets. 3 circlets. You could also nerf it to 1-1-1. I think that's too weak. Or you could nerf it to 1.5, 1.5, 1.5. Which is perfect in terms of strength, but leads to the weird situation where 1.5 intelligence gives you 7.5 extra mana. 12.5 extra strength. It's kind of weird. So I don't think those are good. So I think 3 types of circlets. And they will go down in price from 175 to 150. Claws of attack right now are 5, 9 and 12. I propose to nerf it to 4, 8 and 12, which is both pretty visually consistent, makes the first drop a bit weaker, in line with Circlet, and now the new ring and gloves strength level, all a bit weaker and in line with the gloves and ring. Then +9 will be +8, but the 12 can remain. Ogre 7 will now also drop Thorns with that aura of movement speed for only ground units. Thorns being the only aura that heroes have, but that do not drop as item. Let's add it for the Ogre Lord 7 with that ground move speed. Crystal Ball, I actually don't realize how little 100 vision is. Crystal Ball right now is still mostly a sell item, use once and sell. And it has a cooldown to do a reveal on the map. Most people still sell it for momentum and tempo. Let's give another reason to keep it. Give 200 baseline passive vision buff. Periapt of Vitality. 25 gold cheaper. Makes it cheaper to buy. You get less when you sell it, but cheaper to buy. This helps people to survive nukes on their heroes. It's a slot though, it's an investment. Gotta make that decision. And that's it. That was my balance patch. I hope you guys enjoyed the patch notes. It's wishful thinking maybe. It's a wish list. It may not be comprehensive. There may be biases. I will continue to think about it. Also based on input. I have no influence in the matter. Except that of my natural persuasiveness as a charismatic streamer. And I don't know if anybody's home at Blizzard listening to this, or if perhaps W3 Champions wants to take control of this and start balancing via maps in conjunction with Asian tournaments. Let's talk about it. But I want to prepare for a future where we, the orphans of Blizzard, forgotten and neglected, can carry on the torch of the love for Warcraft 3, as well as the changes in the meta, and keep this game going for strong for many years to come. Amen. Do you think W3 Champions should take on balanced patches in the future? Yes, that was part of my prelude to these patch notes. And I think if nobody home at Blizzard, thank you, Paul. Thanks for the 5 gift subs. I think if nobody home at Blizzard, we should take control of it ourselves. I hate being reliant on a company that's no longer there. Since we already own our own enjoyment. Did you consider a range nerf on Headhunter instead of gold damage? Well, no, I did not consider it because the range buff is the most impactful one to allow them to be used in the meta. And before the range buff, they were practically useless. They did get other buffs as well, 25 health, Berserker training upgrade buff, and Troll regeneration upgrade buff. But I think the range was the singular most important one. So I don't think we should touch it. What would you think, says Optionor, of a circlet that automatically gives 2 to the main stat of a hero, but 1 to the others? Yeah, I think that's okay too, if you want to keep it in one unit. That's a pretty good idea. What would you name the Thorns item? I would call the Thorns item Brambled Crown of Thorns. Crown of Bramblethorn. I noticed you didn't address the lack of sustain, both in terms of mana and health, for Orcish heroes, and more importantly, casters. Is it an intentional weakness? Yeah, you mean like mana sustain? Yeah, I think the healing ward buffs address that, J. Del Rioc. We'll keep spending money on mana, but healing can be taken care of a bit easier. What are your favorite sprinkles of vanilla ice cream? The salty tears of my opponent. Hey Grub, I love this kind of content. You must invest so much thought into this. At what point should you just commission and make your own game? I did put a lot of thought into it. What about 500 instead of 550? It was 450 before. It would raise the skill ceiling quite a bit. Does it? What about archers minus 50? Archers and Headhunter and Fiend are all really strong right now. Should they all be minus 50? Is that a good gameplay direction? All less range? Maybe. Maybe it should be that way. Allow Ghoul, Grunt, and Huntress their time to shine against them. And Footies. Rather than less damage. Yeah, maybe they can all be minus 150 range. Minus 50 range. And Rifleman 550. Part of the ranged meta is their focus fire ability and the gap closer problem for the melee. Do you think Necromancer will be played in standard with the skeleton buff you suggested? Well, here's the thing. How often do you see Witch Doctor as Orc? Never. You see maybe sometimes one Witch Doctor from an Orc that's making shamans. You never see anyone go Doctor because they want Doctor. The step up to get Doctors be useful is too big to get a Lodge. It's the same issue with Necromancer. You almost never see anyone make Temple for Necros. We saw one game where Focus recently lost to 120 who went for Necros unironically with Unholy Frenzy and Cleave Pitlord on Amazonia in a tournament. But Focus played very badly into it. He did lose though, which is cool. Niche builds is something that's good for the scene and fun for the viewers. And my changes certainly wouldn't hurt that kind of strat. But what this will do more than that is in builds where Banshees are used, it is now better to also get one Necro. And that's what I'm targeting. Just like the one Doctor for Shaman users, you can have 1 or 2 or 3 Necromancers. And that's kind of cool. Yep, that's a good idea, Wrath of Gods. Nerf Archer range and then give it back with marksmanship. Yeah. Every other race seems like an instant orb buy, but human only useful against undead. Thoughts on making it the stacking feedback unit rather than its current effect? I saw one idea from Save Orcast that said take its damage, which is +7, and make it +8. But take the healing debuff from 35% minus and make it 30%. That will make it roughly equally good against undead, but better against every other race. I think it's a good idea. James Lewin. Crown of Thorns has Jesus connotations? Oh. That's not what I thought of. Do you have any thoughts on the current status for race-typical anti-air units? Bats, gargoyles, dragonhawks, and hippogriffs. I think they're all niche and useful. What game is being played after this? Warcraft 3. How likely is it that Blizzard uses this as a guideline? Well, I can tell you this, Acromile. Blizzard leaned heavily on community feedback even 3 years ago when they made their patch. Very heavily, but they also had some of their own ideas. Since then, much talent has departed. They need our feedback and ideas more than ever. If they're going to do anything at all. And that's the big question mark. I'll say their need, their desire to use this or other people's feedback, though I think mine is a bit better than some of the feedback I've seen. I might be biased here though. The need to use it, if they're going to make a patch, is higher than before. So I will say 80% plus. But the likelihood of Blizzard planning a patch right now for the game that they have seemingly neglected entirely is probably 10% or less. That's why I'm getting ready for a W3 Champions patch era. What do you think is the hardest matchup for Orc right now? Not I think. It's Night Elf. Night Elf is quite favored against Orc. First of all, thank you for everything. My question is, says Warcraft 3 great again, shouldn't the cannibalized +1 damage buff also add to Abominations? Yeah. I think so. I already gave them baseline +1. I don't think it breaks them to have another +1 from Cannibalize. Yeah, I think so. Are you gonna publish this list? I could, yeah. Definitely could. Just need to remember the few extra changes I made that didn't make it to the notes that I just added. Hit me up if you want to have the text translated to Chinese and let it be heard in the Chinese community. Or, yeah, let's do that. Silver's Flow. I'd love that. See what they think of it. I'm very curious to hear what they would say about it. Seeing if there's any other Q&A. Do you think adding a Naga second race, fifth race should be viable? I think that's way out of the realm of likely right now. I think that's too big of a change for AFK developer. Yes, it's going to be on YouTube, Sea Shark. Do you think Carrion Swarm is fine as it is? Yes, I think so. I don't think it's too strong or too weak. New items and new neutral heroes. Again, I think new stuff. Let's first see if we can stabilize this. Keep in mind that the more you change the game from BattleNet, which is not able to be changed by us, the bigger of a disconnect between some casual players and the pro scene and the stream scene.
I thank you.
I know, I knew him first, Floss. He's mine.
Reforged was a quick cash grab no matter how painful it sounds. Blizz should be ashamed of themselves. We as a community never forget, rarely forgive.
Here, here. Here, here. Could you rate from 1 to 10 how good the balance is right now? So overall, I think state of the game right now is that Night Elf beats Orc. Orc beats Human. I feel like Human beats Undead. But I'm not sure about that. Undead beats Elf, I think. But I'm also not sure about that. Orc Undead. I think it's 50-50. Some people may think I'm biased because of that. You may be right. Undead. Let's see. And then, what did I not address yet? Human Night Elf? Human Night Elf? I think it's a little Night Elf favored. But not as big as Orc beating Human and Night Elf beating Orc. But those are my thoughts, and it's not definitive. Besides us, has anyone else seen or have you talked to anyone else of the Warcraft 3 scene about these suggested changes? Yes, save Orcas. Which is funny because we both made our own wish list and we had so many facets the same. Unbeknownst to each other. Some of these changes are also inspired or completely from him, but maybe 85 to 90% is mine.